Blessed John Paul II was one of the most important figures of the 20th century, and his message continues to resonate in today's world. On today's program, we'll talk to a man who was given unprecedented access to the Holy Father and presents a portrait of the Pope as a man, a thinker, and a leader whose religious convictions have defined a new approach to world politics and changed the course of history, all as a matter of faith.
George Weigel is the papal biographer of the late Pope John Paul II, now Blessed John Paul II, his first part of the biography series, Witness to Hope. And he has just come out now in paperback with the follow-up, The End and the Beginning. George, welcome.
Thank you, Kevin. Good to be here.
How does one become a papal biographer?
Well, in my case, it was an interesting idea that I had in 1995. I had known the Pope personally for 4 years at that point. We had had a pretty intense conversation about many things. I had already written a book called The Final Revolution about his role in the collapse of European communism. But in the spring of '95, it occurred to me how strange it was that this man, 17 years into what was clearly one of the most consequential pontificates in history, had no serious biography done of him. And there had been attempts, but they were not particularly successful. So I proposed the idea that I should do this. And later that year, he agreed over dinner that that would be a good idea. And off we went from there.
How did you get entree to the Holy Father in the first place?
Well, I think he knew that that I had been one of the people interpreting him in the United States through articles, essays, columns, reviews, whatever, virtually from the beginning of his pontificate. We first met during the publication of this book, The Final Revolution, which I think was the first book to make the case that the Church and John Paul II had been at the center of this drama in Central and Eastern Europe throughout the 1980s. That's now regarded as obvious. It was regarded as wildly speculative and provocative in 1992. The Pope was interested in that, not because it put him at the center of the stage, but because I had taken seriously his idea that culture and conscience is what changes history over time. And I had put that analysis to work in this book, which would then necessarily mean that you would put the Church and the revolution of conscience that it created, that produced the Solidarity movement, at the center of the story. So that was the beginning of our really serious conversation.
Were there any ground rules, or did he understand that his life, in a sense, was an open book already?
Well, in March of 1996, I had dinner with the Pope, and I said there are two things necessary to make this work. The first is that I have to have access to you, to your friends, to your associates, and to some pieces of paper that might otherwise be under some sort of a time lock. And I have to be the one who decides what those are. And the second thing is, you can't see a word of this till I hand you a book 3 years from now. To both of which he said, well, that's obvious. Now let's talk about something interesting. I mean, he understood it immediately, that this had to be my responsibility. And since he was a man who taught the imperative of moral responsibility throughout his life, he wasn't going to stop in this case. It was not the case that many of the people around him understood that. And I had more than a few interesting adventures prying out of the machinery, things that the Pope wanted me to have.
Witness to Hope is his life from his birth until 2005. It's about 1,000 pages. When you set out writing it, did you have any idea how voluminous this would be?
Well, actually, Kevin, Witness to Hope is from the beginning of his life until 1999.
Oh, right.
Witness to Hope stops in 99 on the cusp of the Jubilee year, and The End and the Beginning, the second volume, picks up the story from there. I thought this was going to be a big book. I mean, this is one of the most consequential lives of the modern era. Moreover, it's a life that was driven by ideas. And there had to be moments in the book where you would stop the flow of the narrative briefly to explore one or other of those ideas. So I thought this would be a rather substantial book. If you think Witness to Hope is big, let me comfort you with the thought that the original manuscript was twice the size of the finished book. The original manuscript was 2,400 pages, which was cut down to about 1,300 for the actual book.
When you presented this to the Holy Father, was there any trepidation on your part as you handed it over to him?
The trepidation was, as I was driving out to Castel Gandolfo, where he was in September of '99, I had gotten some pre-published advance copies of the book. I was going to give it to him at a Castel Gandolfo over dinner. The trepidation came with, I didn't know what to say. I mean, what do you do when you hand someone their life between two covers? I mean, I thought saying, "This is your life, Karol Wojtyła," would be a rather stupid line. So I said something completely anodyne and idiotic, like, "Well, here it is." And what was quite amusing, I had a copy for then Monsignor, Bishop Jewish, his secretary, and for Monsignor Mokritsky, the other secretary, and everybody went to the picture sections. And we spent 5 minutes chaffing Jewish, who had more hair in the front part of the photo section than in the back part. But as I came back and forth to Rome over the next 3 or 4 months and would see the Pope, he would always greet me by saying, "I am on page 221. A month later, "I am up to 476. At one point I said, "I'll give you the quiz when you get to page 800. He later told me, this must have been 2001 or 2002, that he had actually read the book 3 times, once in English and twice in the Polish edition. And I said, "Why on earth did you do that? I mean, you surely know this story better than I do." And he said, "No, you give me the opportunity to reflect upon things that I ordinarily wouldn't think about." This was a very forward-looking guy, and in a sense, this book gave him a chance to look back, which was not his natural mode of reflection, and I think he found that enjoyable.
George Weigel is the papal biographer of Blessed John Paul II. His books, Witness to Hope and The End and the Beginning, available on Amazon.com and also at many Catholic and religious bookstores. And The End and the Beginning is now available in paperback. We will continue our conversation with George Weigel in a moment, but first, let's take a look at this from Rome Reports on the legacy of Blessed John Paul II.
Every day, thousands of people pass by the tomb of John Paul II. Some are tourists, others just curious, but the vast majority are people with a great devotion and affection for the Pope. Many of them pray at his tomb and in some cases leave messages. Journalist Elisabetta Loiacono has collected and read more than 2,000 of these messages for her book called Caro Signor Papa.
I received the permission to access this material. For my own part, I approached it with great delicacy while reading so many intimate and personal stories. So obviously I could not use real names or any information whose origin could be recognized.
Those who write these messages often ask for the healing of a sickness or help in difficult situations, and in many cases, just advice. But Elisabetta Loiacono says there's something special in these notes to John Paul II.
There are some very nice requests and memories. There was one that spoke about asking for the grace of having a child, and months later, the ultrasound of the child was left there, thanks to John Paul II.
Messages which were very personal, Elisabetta Loiacono considered with extreme care. They were more than just a dialogue between John Paul II and young people, adults and children worldwide.
It's a dialogue with a friend, someone in the family, and this is evident in the messages because they're very colloquial, especially by young people who use acronyms, the language of text messages, emails, like "I heart you," "I love you," and different symbols. It shows one way of addressing John Paul II with a closeness, like when you speak with a good friend.
In many of these letters, there are precise details and petitions for help, with people often leaving their contact information, as if waiting for a personal response from the Pope.
Con Giovanni Paolo II si percepisce appunto.
There's a direct relationship with John Paul II, as if he were still alive. You can see that many people don't just sign their name, but they also include their address or telephone number. As if once the letter were received and read, Pope Wojtyla could then answer them in writing or with a phone call.
Some of the most common messages are from mothers asking John Paul II to help their children not only to find jobs, but also to keep them out of bad company. There are also many requests from girls searching for the man of their dreams. The book recounts the different petitions, stories, and messages of thanksgiving from people around the world to their friend, Blessed John Paul II.
With your help, I am safe.
With your help, we are strong.
With your help, I succeed.
Every year, Catholic Charities helps keep thousands of children safe, strengthens families, and empowers young adults throughout Western New York. But we can only help with your help. Please give today to the 2012 Appeal for Catholic Charities online at ccwny.org.
Welcome back to Matters of Faith as we continue our conversation with George Weigel, the official biographer of Blessed John Paul II. You were in Rome last May for the beatification of Blessed John Paul II. What was that moment like, some 5 years after the spontaneous calls for sainthood now in Vatican Square during his funeral?
It was a powerful experience of the Catholic family coming together again from all over the world. That's my first thought as I looked out from our NBC platform at 1.5 million people, which was far more than what had been expected. And in that sense, it was a recreation of that remarkable experience of the first week of April 2005, when the city of Rome doubled in size as millions of people came to say goodbye to this man they regarded as a friend. And then when the tapestry was lowered from the loggia of St. Peter's Basilica after the Holy Father had pronounced the decree of beatification, it was like he was back. I mean, it was a great picture taken from a photograph by a Polish photographer, Grzegorz Galanczka. And it was perfect John Paul II. I mean, that little twinkle in the eye, Zucchetto was slightly off, mildly devilish look about him. He was showing some of the treadwear of the pontificate at that point, but it is as I would want to remember him. And that and the image of Sister Tobiana Sobota, who had served him for so long, carrying that reliquary up to be venerated by Benedict XVI. That's when my voice began to thicken, and I really had to fight for some control. It was a very, very powerful moment of the church militant and the church triumphant in the one space at the same time.
Do you think we will see his canonization in our lifetime?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, there were other inexplicable cures that had been reported in addition to the cure of this French sister with the Parkinson's problem. Interestingly enough, a number of the favors received, a heavy percentage of the favors received, are pro-life in character. Difficult pregnancies brought to a successful term, couples unable to conceive, becoming able to conceive. There is a quite nice fit in many ways between what the postulator for the cause, Monsignor Oder, has told me about this remarkable outpouring of grace and the life of the man himself. There's one other thing about that process that's worth